First, lo siento, soy un estudiante de español, pero es muy difícil para mí, so I'm going to speak in English tonight, if that's okay with all of you. I think first we're going to have a short video about what we do at IX, so can we roll the video? Thank you. So, I'm Trevor Nielsen. Thank you. I'm Trevor Nielsen. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ixinvests. And IX, as I'm going to tell you tonight, is a permanently capitalized holding company. I started the company with Howard Warren Buffett, who's Warren's grandson. And we're modeled a bit like Berkshire Hathaway in that we look at long-term investing, but we do it with a very specific focus, which is that we want to generate top-tier returns and measurable social impact always. We believe that this is the future of finance, and I'm going to talk more about that. But first, this is going to be a little weird, okay? This is the weird session of the day. You've had a lot of sessions, a lot of amazing speakers, such respect for people like Unilever and others that have spoken today. But this is where things get a little bit strange, because I'm going to talk about psychology tonight. And beyond that, I'm going to talk about our sense of self and how that relates to some of the problems we face. The world's problems, well, the CEO of Unilever did a great job of talking about this. We've got problems as it relates to feeding the world. We have problems as it relates to providing safe water for the world, problems that relate to basic hygiene. I don't want to spend a lot of time going through the problems. We're all familiar with what they are. Climate change. This is the biggest problem we face. This chart, in case you haven't seen this chart before, I think it's the best chart on climate change. It shows the highest historical levels of carbon in our atmosphere in all of human history, and then it shows where we are today. This is creating immeasurable changes to our environment. The frequency and the ferocity of the storms that we face, the typhoons, the monsoons, the hurricanes, you name it, all tied to climate change. But again, I'm not going to dwell on this tonight. This is what I'm going to dwell on. Who knows who this is? Who's this guy? Oh, come on, nobody knows who this guy is? Gordon Gekko. What was the movie? Wall Street. Does anyone remember, this is where you get bonus points, does anybody remember what Gordon Gekko's most famous line from Wall Street was? This is going to date you as well, by the way, so if you raise your hand, you have to be prepared for that. Gordon Gekko, at the height of the Wall Street movie, which is actually a really good movie, proclaimed, "Greed is good." Greed is good was Gordon Gekko's mantra, and he became symbolic of Wall Street in the 1980s. But I'm here today to ask, what are we? What are we, and who are we? What are we? Who are we? What are we? As Americans, who are we? What are we? Who are we? What are we? And who are we? I work in the business of finance, and there are a lot of really tough, strong guys in the world of finance. And when I run around talking about how we should use the world of finance to create positive social impact, I'm almost always talking to these tough guys. I spend a lot of time in New York and in London and elsewhere. And many people, mostly men, in the world of finance perceive that anything that is altruistic in any way must lose money. That if you're a manly man, if you're real macho, you're going to go out there and you're going to win. You're going to take from the other guy. You're going to dominate. And any bit of altruism that creeps into that formula must make you weak. Must mean that you're not performing at a high level. Must mean that you're not a man. But actually, the facts show that when you invest in a way that considers social impact, you achieve above-market returns. The truth, the data says that when we invest both to make money and to do good, we make more money. So the manly man scenario, turns out, isn't very accurate. Well, so I got really interested in this topic, and over the course of a couple of weekends went really, really deep on it, probably deeper than I should have gone. And I started looking at why this was the case. I started searching for the answer to the question of why people believe that if you invest with altruism in mind, you must be losing money. And it led me to this field of psychological study, and I can assure you I knew nothing about this field prior to this, which is called self-schema. And famous philosophers like Immanuel Kant and others were really the pioneers in this notion of self-schema. Self-schema basically is the way we see ourselves in the roles we play in the world. So you grow up in your childhood having this self-schema shaped. You begin at a very early age to start to understand who you are and what you represent. And a series of reinforcements in your life condition you to feel stronger and stronger about that. And so examples of that would be profits-driven versus passion-driven. You know, we all know the hard-charging business person, and then we all know the person that wants to save the stray cats in downtown Mexico City. Business person versus do-gooder. Independent, interdependent. Dominant versus cooperative. The self-schema of most people that work in the world of finance, which is the engine of all of capitalism, leans in one very clear direction. It would be on the left side of that equation. These are people that are profits-driven. They see themselves as business people. They see themselves as independent. They see themselves as dominant. Most people in the world of finance, and I would also say most people in the world of business, believe that this is how they have to be. You know, about 3-4 weeks ago, Elon Musk was giving an interview to the New York Times during a difficult time for Tesla, a company I really admire. And his voice cracked, and he maybe even shed a little tear of some kind. And it was global business news that Elon Musk had started crying, and later he said, no, I actually wasn't crying, I teared up a little bit. Global news in the world of business that this founder and CEO, this technologist, this inventor, had started to cry in an interview. And I ask you, why? Why? What is the myth that these CEOs are perpetuating? Is that what we want a CEO to be at this time in our world's history? The finance professionals who only focus on profit are pushing our world off of a cliff. You don't need to be a student of the climate data if you don't want to. You don't have to read the reports. You don't have to understand what's happening. I'm telling you, because I read all of that stuff, we are headed off a cliff. And it's because of these people. Because the companies that want to do good things in the world are undercapitalized because of this myth. There's almost a tax on those companies. If you're trying to do good, you must not be performing at the level we need you to perform, so we're not going to provide you the capital that you need to grow. This fact is staggering. The full implementation of the Paris Climate Accord, which has received so much wonderful attention and has been, cheered on by everyone around the world except for Donald Trump, requires $13.5 trillion of private sector capital. Guys, that's trillion with a T. If we are to meet the Paris goals, which people seem to agree actually is the least we should be doing, we need massive new flows of capital to come into a clean energy economy as opposed to a dirty energy economy. Finance has to play a role, and there are plenty of examples of good people in the world of finance. I actually added this slide to my presentation because 3 or 4 times people came up to me afterwards and said, hey, what about this person? What about this person? And I want to make clear that it's not everyone in the world of finance that's perpetuating this problem, but it's a lot of people. Maybe, just maybe, the key to solving many of the world's biggest problems is to help investors and business leaders evolve their sense of self. Maybe that sense of self is actually one of the primary drivers in that car that is racing off that cliff. And just maybe, if we want to save this planet, and that's how high the stakes are, that's how serious the problem is, we have to begin by looking at the self-schema, the self-perception that our business leaders have. If you have any more interest in what IX does, you can go to our website, but I want to leave you with one final thought. How many people here have heard of a book called The Wealth of Nations by a guy named Adam Smith? Okay, Wealth of Nations, a lot of people in the audience know what it is, not surprising, because it's seen as being the seminal book on industrial age and post-industrial age economics. It's what guides our current economic system. Adam Smith wrote that book in 1776 in Edinburgh, Scotland. And it's his most famous work by far. But what a lot of people don't realize is that in 1758, just a few years earlier, Adam Smith wrote a different book that wasn't as popular. That book was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. That book laid the case for a capitalist system and an economic system that took into consideration morality. Nobody bought the book. Maybe what we need to do is actually return to the 1758 version of capitalism that Adam Smith invented, one that includes things like mutual sympathy, his words, not mine, mutual consideration, thinking about other people in addition to thinking about ourselves. At IX, our company, we are proving that you can profit with purpose, that you can do both at the same time. We have 35 families from around the world as investors, including Mexicans. Eventually, I believe our company will IPO. And when we are up there ringing that bell with all of our families and all the people who have supported us to that point, it's going to be a pretty powerful indictment of the other business leaders in the world of finance who sold us this false notion that you can't both create profit and make the world a better place. Thank you. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you very much.